ship has been moving for 6 days and there is nothing on the horizon in any direction. No coastline, no other vessels, no contrail cutting the sky. The nearest landmass with more than a handful of permanent residents sits 2,437 kilometers away, and the nearest continental landmass, South Africa, is still 2,816 kilometers ahead across open Atlantic swell. Waves here regularly reach 4 to 6 meters, driven by the westerlies that circle uninterrupted around the bottom third of the globe, and the water temperature hovers around 16 degrees Celsius even in midsummer. Then on the 7th day, something breaks the flat gray line where sky meets ocean. A cone of dark rock rising sharply out of the water, its upper third wrapped in cloud, its summit reaching 2,062 meters above sea level. Seabirds begin to appear in numbers that make no sense for open ocean. Thousands of them wheeling and diving, drawn to something the empty water behind you didn't have. This is Queen Mary's Peak, the summit of a shield volcano that pushes almost straight up out of water more than 3 kilometers deep. The island beneath it is Tristan da Cunha, and the roughly 245 people who live at its base make up the most remote permanently inhabited settlement on Earth. Remoteness gets claimed loosely by a lot of places. Tristan da Cunha earns the title with numbers that hold up under scrutiny. The nearest inhabited land is St. Helena, itself a famously isolated island, 2,437 kilometers to the north-northeast. The nearest continental landmass is South Africa, 2,816 kilometers away, and Cape Town is where every supply ship and research vessel bound for Tristan actually departs from. There is no airstrip. There has never been one, and the island's steep volcanic terrain makes building one close to impossible. The only way in or out is by sea, typically a South African fishing and research vessel that makes the crossing in 5 to 9 days depending on conditions, and only 8 or 9 times a year. Miss the sailing and you wait weeks, sometimes months, for the next one. A resident needing specialized medical care that the island's small clinic can't provide has to time that emergency against a shipping schedule set months in advance. A fact that shapes daily decision-making here in ways most people never have to consider. Even a routine supply run carries real cost. Chartering a dedicated vessel outside the regular schedule can run into hundreds of thousands of dollars, so the island's entire annual rhythm, construction projects, major medical appointments, even weddings timed around visiting relatives, tends to bend around a shipping calendar fixed by a fisheries company in Cape Town rather than by anyone on Tristan itself. 245 residents share one settlement, Edinburgh of the Seven Seas, known locally simply as the Village, built on the only substantial flat ground the island offers. It has a school that runs from early childhood through the equivalent of secondary level, a small hospital named after Kamogli, a general store, a post office, a pub called the Albatross Bar, and an Anglican church alongside a Catholic one. 8 surnames have historically accounted for most of the population: Glass, Green, Hagen, Lavarello, Repetto, Rogers, Swain, and Patterson. A genealogical bottleneck traceable to a handful of founding settlers in shipwreck survivors who arrived across the 19th century. Formal introductions on Tristan tend to skip first names entirely in favor of lineage. A newcomer quickly learns to ask which family someone belongs to, since that single fact usually explains who they're related to, where they work, and which side of the settlement their household sits on. Governance runs through an elected island council of 8 members alongside an administrator appointed by the UK government, and in a community this small, council meetings and grocery store conversations tend to cover the same ground. The island exists because of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, the underwater mountain chain where the African and South American tectonic plates are pulling apart at roughly 2.5 centimeters a year. Tristan sits on a hot spot near that ridge, a plume of magma rising from deep in the mantle, the same mechanism that built Hawaii, except here the plume has built a solitary shield volcano rather than a chain of islands. Molten rock has broken through the crust here for roughly 1 million years, layer upon layer of basaltic lava flow cooling and stacking to form the 98 square kilometer island that exists today. For most of recorded history, the volcano was considered dormant enough to ignore. That assumption ended on October 9, 1961, when a fissure opened directly behind the settlement, A new cinder cone began growing within meters of the village's canning factory, and lava started moving toward the coast. The entire population, all 264 residents at the time, evacuated within days aboard local fishing boats to nearby Nightingale Island, then by the Dutch ship Chisadon to Cape Town, and finally to England, where they spent close to 2 years housed largely at a former RAF camp in Calshot. Almost all of them chose to return once the eruption subsided in 1963, rebuilding around a lava flow that had buried the fish cannery but spared the village itself. That black rock field is still there today, a stark, jagged shelf between the settlement and the shoreline, walkable in 20 minutes. And locals point to it the way people elsewhere point to a family gravestone. Weather here answers to the roaring 40s, the belt of persistent westerly wind that circles the southern hemisphere, largely unobstructed by land. Average wind speeds sit around 25 to 30 kilometers per hour on a calm day, with gusts during winter storms regularly exceeding 100 kilometers per hour. Rain falls on more than 200 days of the year, close to 1,700 millimeters annually, though the ocean's moderating effect keeps temperatures unusually stable for the latitude. Winter lows rarely drop below 5 degrees Celsius, summer highs rarely climb past 20. The terrain does most of the work of confining human life to one spot. Cliffs ring nearly the entire 34-kilometer coastline, rising in places to over 600 meters within a kilometer of the shore, and the interior climbs immediately into the volcanic cone itself. Of the island's 98 square kilometers, less than 4 are flat enough to build on or farm, all of it concentrated on a single coastal shelf on the northwestern side, which is exactly where Edinburgh of the Seven Seas sits, because there was never really a second option. William Glass, a corporal in the British garrison stationed on Tristan after its 1816 annexation, chose to stay behind with his wife and 2 children when the garrison withdrew the following year. He wasn't alone for long. Shipwrecked sailors, itinerant traders, and a small number of women brought from St. Helena and the Cape joined the settlement over the following decades. And by the 1880s, the population had grown into the multi-surname community whose descendants still run the island. Every one of the 8 surnames traces to a specific arrival: the Swains from England, the Greens from the Netherlands, the Hagens and Rogers from the United States, the Repettos and Lavarellos from 2 Italian sailors shipwrecked off the coast in 1892, and Patterson, the most recent addition, brought by an Englishman who married into the community decades later. With 245 people and 8 family lines, most residents are related to most other residents within 2 or 3 degrees, a density of kinship that geneticists have studied for insight into founder effects and inherited conditions. Asthma rates on Tristan, for instance, run notably higher than the global average, a pattern researchers link back to the limited founding gene pool. The economy runs on 3 things, and the first is crayfish, more precisely Jassus tristani, the Tristan rock lobster, harvested under a licensed fishery that has operated since the 1940s and remains the island's principal export and largest employer. The season runs roughly from July through June with a mid-year pause, and the catch is processed at the island's small factory before being shipped, frozen, to markets in Japan and the United States, generating the bulk of Tristan's export revenue and government income. Alongside the fishery, nearly every household maintains a potato patch out on the patches, a communal allotment area, a short walk from the village where families have grown potatoes for generations, a practice that produces relatively little cash value but carries enormous social weight. Planting and harvest days function as informal community gatherings, and the size and health of a family's crop is a matter of quiet local pride, and disputes over allotment boundaries remain one of the few genuinely contentious topics an island council meeting is likely to raise. A smaller third pillar has grown steadily over the past 2 decades: expedition cruise tourism, with a handful of vessels calling each year, weather permitting, to land passengers for a few hours of guided walking through the settlement and along the lower slopes. Landings are never guaranteed. The same open swell that makes the supply crossing difficult can close the anchorage entirely with only a day's notice. But the visits bring in modest revenue through landing fees, craft sales, and the small museum, and give a portion of the community direct, if brief, contact with the outside world several times a year. Everything the island can't fish, grow, or make itself arrives by the same supply ship that brings visitors, roughly 8 or 9 times annually, carrying fuel, machinery parts, medical supplies, and fresh produce that has to last until the next crossing. A missed or delayed sailing doesn't just mean inconvenience. It means rationing decisions made around a calendar nobody controls. Children on Tristan grow up within sight and sound of the Atlantic in a way that shapes almost everything about early life. Swimming, fishing, and small boat handling are skills most residents pick up before they're teenagers, alongside an intimate working knowledge of tide and weather that outsiders often need years to develop. Samari's school on Tristan covers education through roughly age 16, staffed partly by resident teachers and partly by contracted teachers from the UK, who typically serve 2-year postings. After that, there's no local option. Students who want to continue academically or pursue vocational training have to leave, usually for the UK, boarding with relatives or in supervised accommodation while they finish secondary school or begin further study. Some come back, many don't, at least not permanently, and the island's population curve over the past several decades reflects that steady outward pull as clearly as any statistic could. For those years away, contact home used to mean waiting for the next ship's mail sack. A phone call routed through expensive, unreliable satellite links was reserved for genuine emergencies well into the 2000s. Even ordinary childhood on Tristan carries responsibilities most teenagers elsewhere never encounter. Helping haul crayfish traps before school, learning to read an incoming swell well enough to know when the boat can safely land, taking a turn on rotating duty rosters for the generator plant or the water supply once old enough. None of it is framed locally as hardship. It's simply what growing up here requires. Those who do return often bring skills: nursing, engineering, teaching. The community specifically needs, and the Island Council has in recent years tried to formalize incentives for exactly that kind of return migration. Formally, Tristan da Cunha is a dependency of the British Overseas Territory of St. Helena, Ascension, and Tristan da Cunha, with a UK-appointed governor based on St. Helena and a resident administrator handling day-to-day territorial matters on Tristan itself. Locally, the elected Island Council, 8 members plus the administrator as chair, handles most practical governance: fishing quotas, land allocation, infrastructure spending, school and hospital staffing. In a population this size, there's no real separation between governing and being governed. A council member is also a fisherman, a shopkeeper, a neighbor, and disagreements at a council meeting tend to resurface and often resolve over a pint at the Albatross Bar, the pub that functions less as a business and more as the settlement's actual town square. The waters around Tristan da Cunha are influenced by the mixing of cold, nutrient-rich waters from the Southern Ocean with the warmer South Atlantic gyre circulating from the west, a mixing zone that pulls plankton and small fish into extraordinary concentration around the island group. That concentration is why Tristan da Cunha and its outlying islands, Inaccessible, Nightingale, and Gough, roughly 350 kilometers to the southeast, support one of the densest seabird breeding assemblages anywhere on the planet. The Tristan albatross, Diomedea dabanina, breeds almost nowhere else on Earth. Adults have a wingspan approaching 3.3 meters, among the largest of any flying bird, and the species is currently listed as critically endangered by the IUCN, with a total population estimated at under 8,000 mature individuals concentrated mainly on Gough Island. The northern rockhopper penguin, distinguished by spiky yellow head plumes and a temper to match, breeds in colonies of tens of thousands across the group, though its numbers have fallen by more than 90% since the mid-20th century, earning it endangered status. The Atlantic yellow-nosed albatross nests on Tristan and Nightingale in colonies numbering in the tens of thousands, identifiable by the thin yellow stripe running the length of its black bill. On Inaccessible Island, barred permanently to casual visitors and reachable only by special permit, the spectacled petrel breeds nowhere else on the planet at all. Its entire global population, estimated around 15,000 pairs, nest within roughly 3 square kilometers of that single island's plateau. The world's smallest flightless bird, the inaccessible island rail, weighing under 50 grams, survives only there, having gone extinct everywhere else it likely once existed, protected specifically by the fact that inaccessible has remained free of the rats and mice that wiped out ground nesting birds elsewhere in the group. That last detail points to the group's defining conservation crisis. On Guff Island, house mice introduced accidentally by 19th century sailors have, over generations, grown unusually large and developed a taste for live seabird chicks, a behavior almost unheard of anywhere else mice are found. Researchers documenting the phenomenon have filmed mice swarming and consuming Tristan albatross and Atlantic petrel chicks many times their own body weight, while the adult birds evolved with no memory of ground predators, do nothing to defend them. The predation is severe enough that some studies estimate Guff seabird colonies lose the equivalent of 2 million chicks and eggs annually, a rate that conservation groups warn could drive several species toward extinction within decades if left unaddressed. The RSPB, working with Tristan's own conservation department, ran a large-scale mouse eradication operation on Guff in 2021, using helicopter-dispersed bait across the island's roughly 65 square kilometers. Initial results were promising, though a small number of mice survived the operation, and the population has since partially rebounded, and monitoring teams remain on the island tracking outcomes and planning further intervention. A second, less publicized crisis runs alongside the mouse predation: the invasive New Zealand flax and other introduced plant species that have spread across parts of Tristan's lower slopes, crowding out native tussock grass the island's endemic bird species depend on for nesting cover. Conservation staff on Tristan, working with the RSPB and the UK's Joint Nature Conservation Committee, run ongoing clearance programs targeting the worst affected slopes, though the terrain's steepness and the island's small workforce mean progress is measured in hectares per year rather than sweeping change. The Guff moorhen, a flightless rail found only on Guff Island within the group, faces a similar combination of pressures, its population estimated at only a few thousand individuals, making every successful breeding season a matter of real concern to the handful of researchers who track it during short summer field seasons. Set against that crisis sits a genuine recovery story. The sub-Antarctic fur seal, hunted to near extinction around Tristan and Guff by sealing crews through the 18th and 19th centuries, had all but vanished from these waters by 1900. Under protection that began in earnest through the mid-20th century and strengthened after Tristan's waters were designated a marine protection zone, the population has rebounded into the hundreds of thousands across the island group, with beaches on Guff and Nightingale now hosting some of the densest fur seal breeding colonies in the South Atlantic. Southern right whales, similarly depleted by commercial whaling through the 19th and early 20th centuries, have returned to the waters around Tristan in growing numbers each austral winter, and sightings from the settlement's own shoreline have become a genuinely reliable seasonal occurrence rather than a rarity. In 2020, the UK government and Tristan's Island Council jointly declared a marine protection zone covering nearly 700,000 square kilometers of surrounding ocean, one of the largest fully protected marine areas on Earth, closing the zone to bottom trawling and extractive industry while preserving the licensed, sustainable crayfish fishery islanders depend on. Scientists surveying the zone since its declaration have logged recovering populations of several shark and seabird species that had shown decades of decline under earlier, looser fishing rules, and the designation is now cited by marine conservation bodies internationally as a model for how a small, economically dependent community can protect surrounding waters without abandoning the fishery that sustains it. None of this protection erases the pressure the community lives under. Medical vulnerability sits closest to the surface. The island's hospital handles routine care and minor emergencies, but anything requiring surgery beyond basic capability, specialist diagnosis, or extended treatment means evacuation by ship, a journey of 5 to 9 days that can be the difference between a manageable outcome and a fatal one. A resident airlift by military or naval helicopter has been arranged only in the most extreme circumstances, And even then it depends on a suitable vessel already being within practical range of the island. A coincidence of timing rather than a standing service anyone can count on. Climate change is visible here in specifics rather than abstractions. Fishermen report the crayfish moving to slightly deeper, cooler water as sea temperatures rise, a shift that could eventually strain the fishery the island's economy depends on. While warmer, more acidic ocean conditions are cited by researchers as a contributing pressure on the same seabird populations, already stressed by invasive predators. Satellite internet arrived on Tristan in the past several years, replacing a painfully slow, expensive connection with something closer to broadband. And it has changed daily life measurably. Young people now video call relatives in the UK weekly, rather than waiting for the next ship's mail delivery. And access to online education and remote work has, for the first time, given some islanders a path to stay on Tristan while working for employers thousands of kilometers away. It has also inevitably sharpened the pull outward. Teenagers now watch in real time exactly what they're missing by staying, and community elders describe a genuine tension between wanting that connectivity and worrying about what it costs a culture this small and this tightly bound. Population decline compounds all of it. From a peak of close to 300 residents in the late 20th century, the number living permanently on Tristan has drifted down into the low 200s, driven less by any single crisis than by the accumulated weight of young adults leaving for education and never finding a practical reason to return to an island with limited job categories and no guarantee of a partner outside an 8-surname gene pool. The Island Council has experimented with incentive schemes, subsidized housing, guaranteed fishery employment, faster paths to council-approved land allocation, aimed specifically at reversing that outward drift, with modest, closely watched results. Every departure and every return is discussed by name across the entire settlement within days, because there is no scale large enough here to absorb change quietly. Evening settles over Edinburgh of the Seven Seas the way it has for 2 centuries, wind coming off the Atlantic in long, steady gusts, the black lava field from 1961 catching the last orange light before the cloud closes back over Queen Mary's Peak. Rockhopper penguins are still moving along the tide line below the settlement, and somewhere out past the swell, a fur seal colony that didn't exist 100 years ago is settling in for the night on a beach nobody protected in time to save its predecessors. From outside a place with no airport, one shop, and a 5-day boat ride to the nearest hospital reads as deprivation, a life defined by what it lacks. From inside the Albatross Bar, where 8 surnames and 245 people have spent 2 centuries building something that has survived a volcano, a near-total evacuation, and the slow pull of the modern world without dissolving, it reads as something closer to sufficiency. Isolation, it turns out, is not the same thing as emptiness. Tristan da Cunha has spent 200 years proving the difference, building an entire working life inside the very distance that most places spend their history trying to close. If places like this, built on the edges of what's survivable, shaped by geography most of us will never touch, are the kind of story you want more of, this channel exists to keep finding them. We go looking for the settlements past the last regular flight path, the communities holding on at the extremes of heat, cold, altitude, and distance. And we try to tell those stories with the same care for the facts that a place like Tristan deserves. Subscribe if that's the kind of exploring you want to keep doing with us, and stay close for what's coming next. We're already planning the crossing to another island most maps barely bother to label.